Hare Krishna. Thank you again for inviting me to speak about our acharyas. And this is a very, very, very important day and an important acharya that it's really impossible in 1 hour to even barely touch on the glories of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Sarasvati Thakura. Srila Prabhupada saw this as an extremely important day, and he encouraged us that we should make even 108 preparations on this day in glorification of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Sarasvati Thakura. So let me begin by offering my obeisances. Ma Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharane Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskacha Desa Dharane Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Please give me your blessings to speak on this very, very big topic of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakura. Let me first offer prayers to him also. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Iti Namane Shri Varshabhanavi Devi Daitaya Kripabdaye Krishna Sambandha Vijnana Dayane Prabhave Namaha. I offer my respectful obeisances to Shri Varshabhanavi Devi Daita Das, another name of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, who is favored by Srimati Radharani and who is an ocean of transcendental mercy and the deliverer of the science of Krishna. Madhur Jojvala Premadya Shri Rupanuga Bhaktida Shri Gaura Karuna Shakti Vigrahaya Namostute. I offer my respectful obeisances unto you, the personified energy of Sri Chaitanya's mercy, who deliver devotional service, which is enriched with conjugal love of Radha and Krishna, coming exactly in the line of revelation of Srila Rupa Goswami. Namaste Gauravani Shri Murtaya Dinatarane Rupanuga Virudapa Siddhanta Dvanta Harane. I offer my respectful obeisances unto you, who are the personified teachings of Lord Chaitanya. You are the deliverer of the fallen souls. You do not tolerate any statement which is against the teachings of devotional service enunciated by Srila Rupa Goswami. So we get a little glimpse into the nature of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati from his pranam mantra. So it's hard to know where to begin, because really there's the glories of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta, what he did, what was his mood. It's so vast that there are many books, many beautiful. I mean, it's wonderful that there are a number of books that are all very interesting in explaining the life of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakura. So, I have to think where to start, where to stop. So I would like to just focus, I have to get a bit of a focus on what I want to discuss primarily in this class, in this short period of time. What can we cover? So I'm hoping to talk more about the challenges that he faced, the challenges of his times, and how he faced them. Of course, this is a very relevant topic for every generation. Each acharya, they're born at different times in unique situations that have unique challenges. And consequently, they develop different strategies to speak and to spread Krishna consciousness effectively. I mean, for example, we know Lord Chaitanya took sannyas as a strategy that people are not respecting him, so therefore he took Mayavad sannyas because it was respected at that time. Narottam Das Thakur, Jiva Goswami, Srila Prabhupada, I mean, each one, it's actually a very interesting topic to look at each acharya and to see what were their challenges, and how did they face them, and what kind of strategies did they employ to spread Krishna consciousness during that particular time. It's very interesting. How and why they preached, it changes. We're all born at different times, different places, different circumstances, and collectively and individually, we have to figure out how to push forward the mission according to the time. And there'll always be some tension there between tradition and innovation, that it's just not black and white or stagnant. It's not a fixed, spreading Krishna consciousness it's not black and white. It's a living tradition, and living means it grows, it changes. Yet there must always be absolute fidelity to the foundational philosophical principles as outlined in Shastra and given by the acharyas. So we'll go into that a little bit in this class. And of course, at first I want to just say a little bit about I think most of us had heard a bit of his life story, so I won't go into it in detail, but I'd like to tell a little bit about what he grew up in, what his youth was like, and the environment and the education that he received. So, as most everyone knows, he was born as Bhima Prasad in Jagannath Puri, as the son of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who was a High Court judge at the time. So he was born into a very wealthy and prestigious family. So consequently, he was very well educated, and he was exposed to a variety of cultural influences. And from very early on, it was understood he's just super intelligent and very devotionally inclined from a very young time. And I'm thinking, I guess I don't want to spend too much time on his youth, but something to touch on, that by the time he was 7, he got Tulsi beads and a Shringa mantra from his father, his relationship with Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur was very much like, although he was the son, it was like a guru-disciple relationship. And by the time he was 9, he knew the whole Bhagavad Gita by heart. By the time he was 12, he was proofreading for Bhaktivinoda Thakur at 12. And he used to study Chaitanya Charitamrita with Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Imagine such a setting, these two personalities together studying Chaitanya Charitamrita. And he was an absolutely voracious reader. And from very early on, he had a deep interest in rational thinking. He used to practice debating with his friends, and he would argue about society problems from a Gaudiya Vaishnava point of view. And he wanted to defeat, and he wouldn't even eat if he didn't feel like he succeeded in a debate. So this is from his teenage years. He had this very powerful desire to speak the truth. And but he had a very strong influence of Western thought that was infiltrating in India at the time. And of course, the British were there, and they were consciously trying to suppress and make Indians feel inferior. So he was subjected to that kind of environment, and thus he established what he called the August Assembly of prominent youth, the smart kids of the day, who would debate and they would stand up for Krishna Bhakti, which was at that time kind of looked down upon. So he saw how Bhaktivinoda Thakur was trying to recover a somewhat lost tradition, but that it is not something new, something very ancient. And ethics and integrity were really, really important to him from very young. And he was very aware that whatever one talks cannot be really authentic if he doesn't show example in his behavior. So he was a genius in many fields, not just, spiritually, materially. He was so well educated, and he had a didactic memory. It means he could just read things and remember them. An amazing personality. He was a mathematical whiz, also very astute astrologer, and he used to be referred to as a living encyclopedia. And he went to Sanskrit college, where he was exposed to most of the prominent intellectuals of the day, very highly placed people. So he had this kind of environment that he was growing up in. And he read all kinds of literature. He was very interested to understand all philosophical viewpoints. So at the same time, what he loved the most was to read about the lives of sadhus. And he was super attracted and fascinated by the simple life of the sadhu as really the best way to live a spiritual life. And so he always tried, even from young, to be as simple as possible. So as it was such a highly placed person, prestigious family, highly educated, highly qualified. So for him, all doors were open. He could have done anything. He could have been in any high position. Everyone wanted to, he had many offers for what he could do. But what did he do? He actually left university at 22. And although he could get any post, he was offered a high government position, but he didn't accept. He took a low post in Calcutta so that he could live simple, and he could study, and he could preach, and he could avoid marriage. He wanted to do that from the beginning. So although that was his decision, his father did arrange at one point that he would have a job for the king of Tripura's, as the king of Tripura's official historian of the dynasty of the royals of Tripura. So there in Tripura, he went to Tripura, and they had a gigantic library there. And it said that he pretty much speed read the entire library, so that he would speed read to just get the main points out of everything, So it's like he went through the whole library. But by the age of 25, he retired from that. And they actually gave him a stipend, like his retirement fund. At 25, he retired. And so he was extremely well-informed, very broad-minded person with very wide exposure to cultures and the religions of his time. And of course, he was also very thoroughly educated in Bhakti, So he dedicated himself. He worked along with his father. And then came a time for a big, big change in his life, which was, he said for himself, that when he took initiation from Gorkishore Das Babaji, then he received the name Varshabhanavi Devi. And his realization when he met Gorkishore Das Babaji, although he's imagine, so erudite, and here's Gorkishore Das Babaji, who was illiterate. But he said, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta said, that he understood when he met him that scholarship is nothing without bhakti. So these are the words I'll read, I have it here, of his realizations and his experience when he took Diksha. It's interesting. He says, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur says, it was by providential dispensation that I was able to fully understand the language and practical side of devotion after I had met the practicing master, Gaur-Kishore Das Babaji. No education could have prepared me for the good fortune of understanding my master's attitude. Before I met him, my impression was that the writings of the devotional school could not be fully realized in a practical life in this world. My study of my master, and then the study of the books, along with the explanations of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, gave me ample facility to advance toward true spiritual life. Before I met my master, I had not written anything about real religion. Up to that time, my idea of religion was confined to books and to a strict ethical life. But that sort of life was found imperfect unless I came in touch with the practical side of things, which was his practicing master, Gaur-Kishore Das Babaji. So then he became fully engaged, helping his father, traveled widely and preached. That's a whole class in itself. So this went on, I'm not sure exactly the time frame, but for a number of years, until the death or the departure, as we say, of Gaur-Kishore Das Babaji, and also his father, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. I believe it was within about a year of each other. So this was a devastating blow to him, a devastating blow that the two people that were the closest to him, they departed. And the last instructions he received from his father, I will read here. I have copied here. Saraswati, because pure devotional conclusions are not being preached, all kinds of superstitions and bad concepts are being called devotional by such pseudo-sampradayas as Sahajya and Atibari. Please always crush these anti-devotional concepts by preaching pure devotional conclusions, and by setting an example through your personal conduct. Please try very hard to make sure that the service of Sri Mayapur will become a permanent thing and will become brighter and brighter every day. The real service to Sri Mayapur can be done by acquiring printing presses, distributing devotional books, and Sankirtan preaching. Please do not neglect to serve Sri Mayapur or to preach for the sake of your own reclusive bhajan. I had a special desire to preach the significance of such books as Srimad Bhagavatam and Sat Sandarbha. You have to accept that responsibility. Sri Mayapur will prosper if you establish an educational institution there. Never make any effort to collect knowledge or money for your own enjoyment. Only to serve the Lord will you collect these things. Never engage in bad association, either for money or for some self-interest. So these were his last instructions. So as we know that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he had such a challenge to lift up the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, that he had prayed, please send a ray of Vishnu. He needed help. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was considered this ray of Vishnu, a ray of Vishnu. What an amazing thing, that this ray of Vishnu came. And so he was born with a mission, and this was, set out to him by his father in his departing words to him. So the mission was clearly outlined, and it was a Herculean task. It was a huge weight of responsibility alone to revive and to safeguard Gaudiya Vaishnavism. That's what he was being asked to do. And so this was not going to be easy, and there would be many challenges. I think, these are things are relevant, like our next generations, we're departing day by day, next generations of devotees. You will also be faced with so much to keep things alive, to keep it all alive and going. What a responsibility will be there. What a weight, So this weight, it fell on the shoulders of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Sarasvati Thakura. So, what was he up against? What were the challenges? What was the environment like during that time? So we have to consider very different times. It was the beginning of the 20th century, and the world was in transition completely to industrialism. And this had never happened in the history of the world. The world, everywhere in the world, there was an agrarian societies and cultures that they were all agrarian. So now, just during his time, things were becoming industrialized. And the world in general was becoming increasingly materialistic and impious. And of course, they were living under British rule, who were vigorously promoting Western thought and science with an intention of making Indians feel inferior. It was an intended strategy, make them feel stupid. But India was the jewel in the crown. And they did impressive things here. They transformed Calcutta into like a Eurasian metropolis that Prabhupada said was second only to London itself. Like, that is hard to believe if you look at Calcutta today. But indeed, it was a beautiful, well-developed city at the time. So he saw this. This was during his time. He saw the apex of the British Empire. He saw it sort of beginning, and he saw also the final setting of the British imperial sun. So, he watched all these things happening. And at the same time, there was a flood of rational, scientific thought. Values were really changing, significantly changing. And then there was also a flood of Christian missionaries with very condescending attitudes towards the barbaric idol worship that the Hindus were doing. And then you had also the higher classes, which came to be referred to as the Bhadra Lok, like the intelligent, Bengali, well-educated people of the time. They were referred to as a Bhadra Lok. They began to question themselves, their own culture and traditions and religion. And, it worked. The British, it worked on them. They became kind of embarrassed by who they were. And so they, made some attempts to modernize Hinduism, to reconcile it with the Western outlook. And so there were a number of reform groups that were going on, like Ram Mohan was a very famous person, and of course Vivekananda. That's a whole nother story, that there was really a lot of different things going on. And then on the spiritual front, what was going on? Well, there were Smarta Brahmanas that claimed just exclusive hereditary rights to, everything religious, very stifling situation. And there were, loads of professional Srimad Bhagavatam reciters that had just turned this into, it was a family business. It's what you do to make money. And then there were pseudo Sahajya, Vaishnava Sahajyas, who had presenting some kind of like sensualized imitations of Bhakti. And so Bhakti was kind of relegated to obscurity. It was hard to find, pure Gaudiya Vaishnavism, it was not very visible. It practically disappeared. And although, kirtan and dancing, it was actually extremely popular in Bengal. But gradually they lost the philosophy. They did the kirtan, but there was a saying, there's some Bengali saying that they have a mala in one hand and a fish in the other, So, well, it is a lesson for us to be aware of how things can deteriorate, even we're doing kirtan. But, the philosophy behind the kirtan and everything must remain prominent and understood. So also the Babajis it was known, the Babajis are secretly indulging in sensual pleasures. And so this is tough, all around. This is what Bhakti Siddhanta was in the middle of this. How am I going to push things forward? How are we going to show the Gaudiya Vaishnava philosophy in a way that it can be embraced? Difficult times, difficult times. And there was no Gaudiya mission. He was, on his own. It's not like there wasn't, wonderful devotees around, but it was, there was nothing, no one really to support him so much. So this was, imagine the challenge that he faced. It's hard to imagine. Difficult times to preach. And so how did he face it? How did he face this stuff? Because there's no formula, but surely his astute awareness and his social, cultural, political, knowledge and experience and education would be very useful, helpful, and the key to his success. So what did he do? How did he begin? His job, his mission. He prepared. And how did he prepare? Chanting Hare Krishna. That's the preparation. Not just, for a few days. 9 years. I mean, think about it. 1 billion names. He vowed to chant 1 billion names, and it took him 9 years. From my understanding, it's not like he didn't do anything else at all during that time, but primarily he was chanting the holy names. So this is astonishing. How much are we prepared to, to get the qualifications, to preach? Because, he understood, I'm smart, I'm educated, but I need mercy. And you get mercy from the holy name. And so he had profound realizations, of course, after 9 years of chanting the holy name continually. So there's many things that he said in regards to the holy name. I mean, the whole books are there about it. But just to give a sense of what kind of realizations he had after chanting all this time. So there's one quote I have here that I will just read. You cannot, this is him writing or speaking, I'm not sure. You cannot vibrate the holy name simply by moving the lips and tongue. The pure name of Krishna is not lip deep, but heart deep. Ultimately, it goes beyond the heart and reaches the land of Krishna. When Krishna comes down, the name comes through the heart and moves the lips and tongue. And that vibration is the holy name of Krishna. And when Krishna, in the form of sound, descends from the transcendental world into the heart, and from the heart, controlling every aspect of the nervous system, comes to the lips and tongue. Dancing there is Krishna Nam. Wow. Imagine what that is, real chanting. One day, some lifetime. So he was so committed. And so naturally, that commitment led to wonderful mercy that flowed down to him. That at one point, it was described that he had a dream. And in that dream, he was at the Yoga Pit. And at the Yoga Pit, he saw Gaur-Kishore Das Babaji, his father, Bhaktivinoda Thakur. They appeared to him. Not really a dream. There's another word, can't think of it right now, but it's a vision. It's an experience. It's not a sleeping experience. It's an awake experience. And so Jagannath Das Babaji, the 6 Goswamis were all there, and the whole Panchatattva appeared before him. And somehow in unison they said, Saraswati, why are you worrying? Begin the task of establishing Shuddha Bhakti. Distribute Gauravani universally. Expand service to Gaur Nam, Gaur Dham, and Gaur Kam. With unbreached enthusiasm, broadcast the message of bhakti. Numerous people, immeasurable opulence, and boundless scholarship awaits the blessing to serve your mission. All will manifest when required. Come forward with full strength to distribute the message of Mahaprabhu's Prem Dharma throughout the globe. No worldly hindrance or menace will be able to obstruct this undertaking of yours. We are forever with you. Wow. Imagine. So now, fully empowered, fully receive the blessings and the mercy from everyone showered down upon him. So with utmost enthusiasm, he became the most amazing spiritual warrior, just to push forward with full force, fearlessly and boldly, to basically wage war, not with weapons and brutality, but to knock down the walls of all the misconceptions that block all of our vision of Krishna. So, in order to wage this war, he would create dynamic, out-of-the-box strategies to do so. So, as we, when there's a war, when there's going to be a war, depending on where the war is situated, maybe it's going to be fought in the water or in the jungle or in the city, and, you have different situations. So, there's different strategies for warfare. Like in World War I, the primary strategy was trench warfare. It was a way that they could hold the line even sometimes for years. But then by the time it was World War II, they had planes. So, the trenches, they would just become graves, bombarded from above. So they needed a new strategy. So you can't just rely exclusively on the success of the past. You have to look at the present situation. Nowadays they call that an environmental scan. You really have to scan the environment and think what is going on and how to move forward. And actually, it's very interesting that Srila Prabhupada, once he was asked by someone, well, you really weren't doing much in your first year that you were in America. And he was like, oh, I was very busy. And they're like, really? What were you doing? And he said, I was studying the American people. Prabhupada said that. Imagine it's like going to another planet, and seeing all these weird people doing things totally differently from the way he was brought up. I mean, what a phenomena to observe, especially during the 60s, the hippie times. And these people were like, we're like another species of life. It's like entering into another planet, but Prabhupada was studying it and making strategy, developing, what am I going to do? And amazing what he did. And that's another many classes. So, but the point being that, that's what it means, being alive and dynamic in Krishna consciousness. It's just not a black and white thing, You really have to be thoughtful and deep. And, we learn from our acharyas, and they light our path, and they give us like a roadmap. But, we have to walk that road ourselves, and we have to apply Krishna consciousness on our own, and we have to find our way, with our own inspiration. And it's personal, and it's a dynamic process. It's exciting. So anyway, so what did Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur do? What were his strategies? So the first radical move that he made was that he took sannyas. It doesn't sound radical, but actually it was. He took sannyas, and not only did he take sannyas, but he gave it to himself. Why? Why would he do that? What was the idea behind this? So the idea behind him taking sannyas, why did he do that? It was an important strategy. Because historically, the time of the Goswamis, Rupa and Sanatan, they didn't take sannyas. They took Babaji Vesh, because technically, this was also strategy for them. Technically, they were considered themselves not qualified for sannyas or guru. So often they sent prospective disciples to Gopal Bhatta Goswami. So Babaji Vesh, well, that's considered outside of Varnashram. So they could do that, So then those followers of Rupa Sanatan, then they thought, well, if they didn't take sannyas, then we shouldn't. So then, mainly, on the Vrindavan side, mainly it was Babaji's. And then on the Bengali side was a predominance of Grihastas. But over time, as I was saying, contamination, it just really crept in. And how and why that happened, that's a really big topic, and it's an important topic. Well, how did it degenerate? But, long story short, basically, in Vedic tradition, there's kind of like two ways to approach God. We have to go beyond matter, and so we reject everything, and that's extreme and it's difficult. Or the other is, technically it's Tantra. Now that is a very charged word nowadays. It's not what most people think it is. We have Vaishnava Tantras. We have the Pancharatriki Vidhi, which is our deity worship. So then this is a way God appears in matter as a means for us to access the spiritual. And the same principle there is with the holy name and the holy Dham, that Vaishnavas, they go beyond matter to spirit, but they use matter to do so. So this became distorted. It became what some say is a left-handed tantra, that all matter is used. So we recognize that there's certain things that take us away from God and certain things bring us closer. So thus our regulative principles, etc. But left-handed makes no distinction. So yeah, have sex to go to God. So there's a lot of like Buddhist and Shaivite influences that got all mixed in. Keeping philosophical integrity, that's not an easy thing as time rolls by. And that they would even, imitate Radha and Krishna's pastimes. And this, for some, Babajis embrace this. So they were looked down upon, and there was a stigma, on these Babas, that they're immoral. And, respectable people, they just didn't appreciate, So therefore, it was just to make a respectable presentation as a Babaji, it just wasn't going to be doable. So, to reach people, respectable, intelligent people, he had to present in a different way. So traditionally, sannyas is part of the broad Vedic culture. Was at the time much more respectable. Even some Mayavadi preachers had brought respectability to sannyas in the society. And so taking sannyas, it made sense. It was a break from the Babaji tradition. But then, you could see how it makes sense. People respect it, so go for it. But who's going to give him sannyas? Who's he going to take it from? His Guru Maharaj is gone. He's not going to take it from a Mayavadi sannyasi. His whole mission was to defeat them. And certainly he's not going to take from a Babaji. So he took it himself. He had to do that. And he gave it to others from there on out. So he knew that to lift Gaudiya Vaishnavism out from ill repute, he would need an army to help him, an army of devotees. And the times were changing. It wasn't possible to get young men to become Babajis. There were Christians there, and they were, all those monks and nuns, and, they had their way of doing things. So sannyas, it just had a much bigger and better appeal. So it was a strategy. He had to start a new tradition himself, and he was empowered to do so. So he reinstituted a respectable Vedic tradition, and it worked. He created an army of sannyasis, and they were on fire. They opened 64 temples in a very short time. And they were intelligent young men. Like, it was dynamic. It was powerful, what they were doing. And then the next thing he did, we're looking at his strategies. So he took sannyas, he gave it to himself. And then the next thing he did was he created a hard institution. Now, up to this point, Lord Chaitanya's mission was loose-knit. It was what you might say like a soft institution. And it's interesting to read that Srila Bhakti Siddhanta, he makes the heaviest statements about institutionalized religion and about organized religion. There's just like a plethora of damning quotes about organized religion. He was clearly not impressed by the religious institutions that he saw around him. He didn't think they were effective. So he said things like, here, there's a couple of things I have noted down here. Basically he said religious institutions can become stifling and they can sap the spirit or cramp the flow of bhakti from the devotee to the world. And he said the idea of an organized church in an intelligible form indeed marks the close of the living spiritual movement. He even compared, organizations to like organized religion to putana, that the institution which is meant to nourish can also poison, like putana. In this way, a living movement can become impotent. And he said things like, a true teacher or guru is not a product of any mechanical system. So these are amazing quotes. And yet, he created a very hard institution with very strict rules and everything. So why did he do that when he had such an opinion? Why did he do it? So, looking at it, he's not condemning, but he was cautioning us against the selfish desires sabotaging the purpose of religious institutions, if it is misused. He is teaching us to be very careful with power, with prestige, and that we must remain fresh and not mechanical, and that things should not degenerate into a lifeless arrangement. And he recognized that, organized religion, it could choke the spirit. But he also saw, and this is the main thing, that it would be a very effective way to spread Krishna consciousness. And that without it, it would just be impossible to do what needed to be done. He had to have organization. He had to do it in this way in order to spread it all over the world. Because he said, without it, it would just be like little trickles of water everywhere, like little devotees here and there trying to reach the ocean. But it just, would tend to dry up along the way. Little trickles, they dry up very easily because most people's spiritual urge is not so strong. But if you make a pathway for the trickle to reach other trickles, then it will eventually become a big river that more easily reaches the ocean. This is sort of like Prabhupada's, bundle of sticks. With one, you just break it, but, together. So, he understood very clearly that although there are dangers and although there are so many downside to organized religion, but he could not be effective. He could not preach effectively without organization. So, and by nature, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati was a strategic thinker, and he understood he needed a structure to usher Gaudiya Vaishnavism into modernity, and in order to share the culture with the world. He had to do, something unique and different. So he created the Gaudiya Math, which, established many temples, but his intention was to create, a way to powerfully impact on all levels of society. It wasn't, he just didn't want to open temples and ring bells. He wanted to have an impact on society. So he created different strategies for connecting with different types of people in the world. All different levels, different types of people. How do you get out to them? How do you say, for example, the intelligentsia in the Western audience. How will we approach them? So he had different strategies for that. One of the main things, like when he sent his people to the West, he said that they should focus primarily on Lord Chaitanya rather than Krishna. There's clear reasons around that. Somehow Krishna is a debauch or something. Focus on Lord Chaitanya. So in their preaching, they focused on Lord Chaitanya. When they're talking to, Western people or highly placed people. And he himself, he borrowed modern phrases from others, that were not really Gaudiya Vaishnava lingo. Like he used the term universal fraternity and cult. I mean, not cult in how it's used today. I mean, words get used really differently over time. Spirit, preach, church, he used these words in his speaking so that people from the West could kind of get it. And he met with numerous high-ranking British politicians, and he went to extreme lengths to make people comfortable, to make them feel at ease when he met them. I mean, you could tell many, many stories about that. So interesting what he did. He met scholars and leaders of all types, and he was never defeated. People were just amazed by his intelligence, really. When he spoke with Westerners, he used very high English, like he knew English better than the English. And, it was kind of a strategy to, beat them at their own game. He was so smart, people had to look in the dictionary, what's he talking about? So apparently he didn't always speak like that, with these very big words and everything. It was, strategy. And it impressed people, of course. It was very impressive. He was brilliant at it, And he introduced really so broadly, the concept of yukta vairagya, just in a major ways using modern technology. You think that it was just Babaji's before. So he's using modern technology, radios, cars. He even drove in a Rolls Royce. He wore sewn cloth. He wore Western clothing on some occasions. He went in boats. He had a wristwatch. He used non-spiritual people to help his movement. All of these things were totally revolutionary. Totally from him. I mean, it's amazing. And then, the other strategy for, especially for, the higher intelligent people really for everyone was the use of the printing press, which, that was new. That wasn't done before. And then he got 4 presses. That was like a big thing. And it was referred to as the Bhagavat Yantra, God's machine. So we're using God's machine because he wanted to reach as wide an audience as he could possibly reach. So they printed thousands of books, essays, magazines. I mean, it's phenomenal what they did, phenomenal. And he even published other Sampradayas books from Madhva and Ramanuja. He had a strong desire to unite, so he would stress points of agreement with them. And so then, as far as strategies for others, say the general people, he created in Mayapur, which nobody was going there yet. So, it's hard to get there, and, he built that road. We call it Bhakti Siddhanta Road, so people could come in. And he created, this is described in Bhakti Vikash Maharaj's. He has this 3 volumes. He elaborately describes, in so much, it's amazing books, the theistic displays that he had 15 days, and it spread across a radius of a mile in Mayapur at that time. And they used all kinds of things, all varieties of attractive things to get people to come out there. Dolls and toys and mechanized devices and things, nobody ever did things like this before, So then also, which was for the devotees, what other strategies were there? So he did many things to try to attract the general people, general public. And then as far as for the devotees, he organized magnificent parikramas. He revived and really made it a big thing, the Navadvip parikrama. It's amazing. Also the elaborate, you can read about it's just so amazing what he did. There was 5,000 people would go on parikrama. They would have 100 mridangas, flags, horns, and he would lead. And he said, we're doing this not just to gawk at holy places in the manner of tourists, but to perform mass sankirtan and to allow, so this was also for the general mass of people. It wasn't just for the devotees. He said, for hearing from representatives of Godhead and to preach to the locals. That's why we're doing this, you know. So he spoke very, very strongly about the importance of doing Navadip Parikrama, especially in Vrindavan Parikrama, and the power of it and the power of purification of these parikramas. And imagine how that's impacted on us down through the ages, you know, that we have these, you know, amazing parikramas. It just becomes the standard. But they were also for preaching. They were for the general mass of people to see, you know, it going on, see live Krishna consciousness, bring it out to them. And, you know, then also his strategies with his own devotees in his own group. What did he do? He, his emphasis with his devotees, he subordinated Raganuga Bhakti, and he emphasized Vaidhi Bhakti. Given the history of what was going on at the time, this was his emphasis. He strongly condemned premature raga marg. And he created a systematic structure which emphasized that the primary sadhana is service and sharing through kirtan, katha, and brihat mridanga. And you just see how the more you learn about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, the more you see how Srila Prabhupada strictly followed in his line. Same emphasis, everything. It's wonderful, really. And he didn't allow his devotees to read very, very high rasa tattva books. He didn't allow it. And he emphasized the importance of reading again and again Sanatan Shiksha. You know, those instructions that Lord Chaitanya gave to Sanatan Goswami in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. He said they should read again and again. And he especially encouraged the reading of Chaitanya Charitamrita and particularly Chaitanya Bhagavat. He said you should read 100 times. 100 times. Yeah, we got to do that. And why did he say that? He said because by hearing this Chaitanya Leela, it will soften your heart. It will soften your heart. And then you can understand tattva. You have to have a soft heart. So this is important. Instructions from him. And he also, other strategies, things that he did, he made a very strong effort to find and develop many pilgrimage sites and establish Padapiths, the place of Lord Chaitanya's feet. Many, many places all throughout India he did that. And of course, the main big deal that he did was sending his devotees to the West. So he was radical. He was a pioneer. He was an amazing personality, amazing personality. So he created so many different ways to reach people, to attract the intelligent and sensible people. Yena kena prakarena, somehow or another. That was, Prabhupada liked to quote that, somehow or another, get people to fix their mind on Krishna. You know, in the process of Krishna consciousness, as given by acharyas, our acharyas, the sambandha and the prayojana, you know, the establishment of the relationship and the goal, it's always the same. That never, ever will change. But acharyas, they may adjust in the area of abhideya, of how you reach the goal. You know, so this is something that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was just an amazing acharya of, you know, how to do all these things. And he had just an extremely powerful preaching mood. Let me read something. This is getting a little bit long, but well, it's really important. I'll try to stop soon. So this is a quote from him. Everyone's auspiciousness will come by preaching about Lord Chaitanya. Like itinerant merchants, you should take the wares of Chaitanya Vani throughout the globe. If necessary, go to all four corners of the earth. Violence to others, to oneself and others, under the name of Nirjan Bhajan, must be stopped. Every single door must be knocked on at least once. If the inhabitants sincerely inquire as to which manner of Hari Bhajan may be performed aright, tell them that the only way is through the Bhakti Vinod Dhara, the line of Bhakti Vinod Thakur. The only duty of the most merciful persons is to transform the degraded taste of people. If you can save even one person from the great force of Mahamaya, then that will be a greater act of philanthropy than opening millions of hospitals. We should never display any kind of aversion towards Sankirtan Yajna, which is perfect sacrifice, complete with the 7 forms of sacrifice. If we have gradually increasing love for that, then everything will be accomplished and we will attain ultimate perfection. Just preach the words of Rupa and Raghunath with enthusiasm and courage, with complete dedication to the followers of Sri Rupa. If I stop preaching the unbiased truth due to fear that people will not like it, I am accepting the non-Vedic way, rejecting the Vedic way. Then I become an atheist and I lose my faith in the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the personification of truth. We are here on this earth not to work as artisans for making big buildings with wood and stone, but to work only as messengers of the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Dev. To transform the adverse desires of the jivas is the supreme duty of the most merciful. To rescue one person from the stronghold of Mahamaya is an act of superb benevolence. I wish that every selfless, tender-hearted person of the Gaudiya Math will be prepared to shed 200 gallons of blood for the nourishment of the spiritual corpus of every individual of this world. Srila Prabhupada really took this to heart. So, all these innovative and creative strategies, they were the key to his successful missionary activities. He was so serious about the mission given to him. Again, I'll read just a few quotes. Some quotes from him about mission. We are here on earth not to work as artisans for making big buildings with wood and stone, but to work only as messengers for the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Dev. To transform the adverse desires of the jivas is the supreme duty of the most merciful. To rescue one person from the stronghold of Mahamaya, oh, I read this one already, is superb benevolence. So life is for the glorification of topics on Hari. If that is stopped, then what need is there to carry on life? So many, he had such a mood in preaching. And we know that he spoke against the caste system and initiating by quality, not caste. And this caused a lot of, that was revolutionary. That was an incredible strategy. And we know that he was known as the Nrsinga Guru. Now that doesn't mean he was also known as very, very loving and very soft-hearted. But Nrsinga Guru, he was very kind, but he was very strict. And he said himself, this is what he says of himself, I'm not only a proofreader of the press, I'm a proofreader of men. I see their faults and I try to correct them. I am also a proofreader of religion. I have appeared in the zodiac sign of the crab. So whenever I see anything undevotional, I act like a crab. If I see any so-called devotion not actually in the true unalloyed spirit, I shall pierce it. So in this way, you know, he acted as an ideal spiritual master, and sadhu, it means to cut, like a surgeon, you know, cut the knot of material existence. But we have to be qualified to do that. You know, nobody wants to lie under the blade of an amateur surgeon. You know, that could be lethal. You know, you have to have, you know, a qualified surgeon. You know, someone who's qualified, trained, he knows exactly how to cut and not harm. Not harm the patient, but actually save the patient, you know. So to do like this methodology, you have to be very qualified, completely pure, and absolutely devoid of false ego. You have to actually love the patient, the person you're preaching to. You have to love them. You know, so without, you know, to use this like cutting technique, it doesn't work. But we saw with Srila Prabhupada how we could use it, and people would just, yes, yes. He could say very strong things and people didn't take offense because there is no false ego there. There's only concern and genuine love for the well-being of the other person. That's Srila Prabhupada. We saw it. And so the fact that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, that he could cut in such a way, it tells so much about him. That he could do that because of incredible purity. That he was so strong, but he would do no harm. And Srila Prabhupada was just like this also. You know, and of course, he got a lot of opposition. That's a whole nother class, the kind of opposition. You know, because he preached against these deviant sects and the caste system, and, you know, he chastised and he exposed many. So he was hated by some and even received death threats, you know, but it didn't deter him in any way. But then the final thing that has to be mentioned, the final radical strategy that he did was he created a GBC. He asked them to do things collectively. You know, he actually got the idea, this is from the British Railway. It was an absolute marvel how these, you know, the term GBC, governing body, I think it came from the British Railways. That it was just a marvel to people how they had all these trains going off in all different directions and how it was all organized, you know. So he did something that was normally, this was not done. It was like doing things collectively and democratically. That was very hard for those his followers to digest that. You know, usually there's one acharya, one goes to the next, but he understood, you know, the age of Kali, and so it was difficult. And so really, actually, within a matter of like 10 days, things ruptured with his Gaudiya Math, unfortunately. And Prabhupada saw this, it was so traumatic. Imagine, you know, they were powerful like the Titanic sank. You know, they didn't think it could sink, you know, but just see. And for this reason, Srila Prabhupada, very early, right in the beginning, when there was just a few kids, you know, joined him, he made a GBC, you know, and because in this Kali Yuga, Prabhupada often said, you know, maybe the one person, you know, won't be, but a group together, you know, you may be able to keep going. And, you know, although it has been admittedly quite a rocky road that we have been through and continue to go through, but it's still going, it's still alive. It's a miracle. You know, it hasn't, you know, fully ruptured. You know, it is going on. You see, just look at the book marathon, Christmas marathon that's going on all over the world. It's amazing. So we're alive. It's going on, you know. So then in Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's final words, he stressed the importance of Lord Chaitanya's mission in the West, So he said, everyone's auspiciousness will come by preaching about Lord Chaitanya. Like itinerant merchants, you should take the wares of Chaitanya Vani throughout the globe. If necessary, go to all four corners of the earth. And bang on every single door, you know. And so he emphasized this towards the end. And then Srila Prabhupada, his last letter, he asked, how can I serve you the best? And he said, I'm fully confident. The response was, I'm fully confident that you can explain in English our thoughts and arguments to people who are not conversant with the languages of other members. This will do much good to yourself as well as your audience. I have every hope that you can turn yourself into a very good English preacher if you serve the mission to inculcate the novel impression to the people in general and philosophers of the modern age and religiosity. And later he said, I have a prediction. However long in the future it may be, one of my disciples will cross the ocean and bring back the entire world. I think it's pretty clear who did that. So we have just an immense debt to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. It was he who insisted again and again to Srila Prabhupada, leave home and go to the West. And Prabhupada it was repugnant to him at the time. But he persisted through dreams to Srila Prabhupada. So, and he would say, now is the time, and he pushed him. And we have reaped the benefit, you know. And Srila Prabhupada always said again and again, I am successful because I just followed the order of my spiritual master. And he really, really did. So today is, he's our grandfather. And Prabhupada used to say you should pray to the grandfather who can be more merciful. We need more mercy. You pray for the dedication and the strength to practice and to preach effectively in our day and age in a way that would be pleasing to him and all of the acharyas. So all glories to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare.